Today, we're going to build a full stack application using Next.js, Supabase, and then we're going to deploy it using Vercel. Now, you're seeing a little video overlay here of kind of the application that we're going to build. It's a notes application where you can create, delete, and update different notes. We also implement AI summaries for these notes using OpenAI's APIs. So we're getting some AI in there as well. And then we deploy at the end using Vercel. So by the end of this project, you are going to build out a fully deployed full stack application with Next.js and Supabase. And you're going to learn a bunch about Next.js, server actions, different patterns that I like to use, and all that sort of thing. So without further ado, let's head over to VS Code and get started. The first thing that we're going to do is, of course, create our Next.js app. So I'm going to run npx create hyphen next hyphen app at latest. Now, in a sec, I'm going to show you my package.json file in which it's going to show you all the different versions and stuff that I'm using for this project. And I think it would be a good idea to kind of pin your package versions to the same exact versions I'm using, just to make sure that everything works as expected for you as it does for me. So I'm going to use at latest here. But like I said, I'm going to show you my package.json. You can also see that in the kind of completed project here, which I'll also have linked in the description. And I would recommend setting your versions to the same versions that I'm using. But I'm going to run this. We're going to call this Brainwave because that's going to be the name of the app. Don't ask me about it. ChatGPT came up with a name for me, and I just thought it is going to be fine for this demo. I'm not going to use TypeScript here, but you definitely can if you like TypeScript. But I do get a lot of comments on my videos like, hey, thank you for not using TypeScript, because sometimes there's an extra barrier to entry for TypeScript if people don't know it and they're just trying to learn about like Next.js and Supabase and stuff. And if you already know TypeScript, I think that you can definitely do this in TypeScript if you'd like. No ESLint, yes to Tailwind CSS, no to SRC directory, yes to app router, yes to TurboPack, and no to import alias. And now that this is created, I'm going to go file, open, and then open this project within VS Code. So we have our new project here. I'm going to close this open editors box. I'm going to close my welcome menu. I'm going to X this out because we're just going to work on the main branch here. And then the first thing that we're going to do is install our Supabase packages. So we're going to run npm I at Supabase /Supabase.js and at Supabase /SSR. Now, with those installed, what we're going to do next is actually get our Supabase project ready to go here. And we are going to add a couple of environment variables for Supabase. But first, let's go get those created by heading over to Supabase. So I'm just at supabase.com here. I am already logged into Supabase. If you don't have an account, go ahead and create an account. It should be totally free, and I do not think that you need to put in a credit card or anything like that to create an account. But I'm going to head to my dashboard. I'm going to click my Code Ryan Solomon organization, and then I'm going to click new project. I'm going to call this project Brainwave. I'm going to set a password and definitely not reuse the same password I use for everything. And then I am closer to the West Coast here. So pick whatever region is closest to you, and then I'm going to create a new project. Now, after creating our project here, you should be able to scroll down on this home page and you should see a project URL as well as a project API key. We're going to use these as our .env variables, but first let's head back to VS Code and I'll show you where we're going to add these. In the root of your project here, so on the same level as your package.json, your JS config, on the root of your project, we're going to add a new file. It's going to be .env.local. And then in this file, what we're going to add is a next public Supabase URL. And we're also going to add a next public Supabase anon key. So next public Supabase URL, next public Supabase anon key. And then with these, we're going to use the exact variables from our project dashboard that I just showed you. So back here in Supabase, I'm going to take my project's URL. I'm probably blurring it out right now. I'm going to take this project URL. I'm going to click copy and then just paste it in my next public Supabase URL.env variable. So I'm going to paste it in here. And now I'm going to do the same thing for my anon key. I'm going to copy my API key. It says anon public here. This is your anon key. I'm going to copy this and paste that within my next public Supabase anon key. So this is going to set up our connection to Supabase. And now I'm going to close out of this .env.local. Now, one more thing I want us to do here in Supabase is I want to go to this authentication tab. And then I believe I want to go to sign in /providers and make sure allow new users to sign up is green. And then what I'm going to do here, just for the sake of this demonstration, is we are not going to make our users confirm their email address. We are going to turn this off. Now, you can, of course, leave this on in your project. I just think that for the sake of demonstrating this and prototyping, it just is a little cleaner to just turn this off for now. You can definitely turn this on your own later, but we're going to turn confirm email off, and then we're going to click save changes. Now it's going to give you this little warning here about the one-time password expiry. That's totally fine to ignore for now. But like I said, in a production application, we'd probably want to make them actually confirm their email. But for the sake of this demo, it'll just be a little easier for us to turn this off for now. But with that, that really kind of sets up Supabase how we want it. I'm going to go back to users here in our Supabase project because eventually we will sign in users. But let's go back to VS Code. And now what I want to do is I want to start getting together some basic utilities for working with Supabase within our Next.js project. So at the root of your project here again, I'm going to add a new folder, and it's going to be called utils. In our util folder, I'm going to add another new folder called Supabase. And this is where our Supabase utilities are going to hang out. And we're going to create 4 separate files here within this Supabase folder. Our first is going to be an actions.js. And for this file, it's basically going to be our connection to Supabase for our server actions that we're going to set up here in a sec. So we're going to import, create server client from @Supabase SSR. So import, create server client, and then we're going to import cookies from next headers. Those are going to be our 2 imports, and then we're going to export an async function called create action client. At the top, we're going to say const cookie stores equal to await cookies to give us access to our cookies. And then we're going to return create server client, in which the first argument to create server client is going to be process.env.next public Supabase URL. The second argument is going to be process.env next public Supabase anon key. And then the third argument is going to be an object in which we're going to set a cookies property to also point to an object in which we're going to set a get all function that is going to return our cookie store dot get all, calling that, and then mapping over the response, destructuring the name and value, and then returning an object with the name and value. And then one more property here. So we set our get all property, but we're all going to set a set all. So set all cookies, and then we're going to run cookies dot for each, destructure name, value, and options, and then run cookie store dot set name, value, options to write our cookie headers. So this basically just makes sure our cookies are set up when using our server actions so we don't run into any issues when using those. The next file we're going to add is a client.js file. That is basically going to give us access to Supabase stuff client side in our Next.js application. So we're going to import, create browser client from @Supabase SSR. We're going to export a function, create client. We're going to return create browser client, calling that. And then as our 2 arguments, it's going to be the same 2 arguments for our actions file. So I'm going to just copy these and paste those in here. It's our next public Supabase URL, comma, next public Supabase anon key as our 2 arguments there. And that is it for this file. I know that this is just like a lot of code for setting up, and this will make our lives a lot easier here in a sec. The next file we're going to add is going to be a server.js file in which we're going to do a very similar thing that we were doing before. We're going to import, create server client from @Supabase SSR, import cookies again from next header, export an async function called create client, const cookie stores equal to await cookies. And then we are going to return create server client, calling it. First two arguments are going to be the same as what they've been. So I'm going to just paste those in. Third argument is going to be very similar to what we did in actions here. So I'm going to just copy this object as the third argument. We're going to paste it in here. The cookies and get all are going to remain the same. But for our set all we're going to do is a no op here. So it's going to accept underscore cookies, but then we are going to just have the opening and closing brackets, and it's just going to be a no op because in our server components, our cookies are going to be read only here. So we're not going to be setting our cookies like we did in our actions. And now we are going to add our last file within our Supabase folder. I know it's a lot of code, but we're almost there. Let's add a middleware.js file. We're going to import our create server client from Supabase SSR. Once again, import next response from next server, export async function update session, accepts a request, const response is equal to next response dot next, calling it, passing in an object in which the request points to an object with a headers property. And then we set request dot headers. And then we say const Supabase is equal to create server client, calling this function, adding our URL and anon key here as the first two arguments as we've been doing. And then we're going to go back to our actions. We're going to copy this object again back to our middleware as our third argument, paste that in here. But this is just going to look a little bit different. So instead of cookie store here, it's going to be request.cookies.getAll.map. So request.cookies.getAll.map, and it's going to be the same logic here. And then in our setAll, it's going to accept our cookies here. And we're going to do cookies.forEach. But instead of cookie store, it's going to be response.cookies.set name, value, and options. So fairly similar setup, but just a little bit different here. So the getAll has request.cookies.getAll. And then the setAll has response.cookies.set. And then here below are const Supabase, and I'm going to close my terminal here to have more space. We're going to say await supabase.auth.get user, and then return our response. And this is basically just going to update our user session and keep that up to date. So now with this in place, I want to add two more functions to our utils folder. So not in our Supabase folder, but in our utils folder, I want to add a new file, and I want to call this redirect if authenticated.js. And in our redirect if authenticated, basically what we're going to do here is we're going to check, do we have a user? Are they authenticated? If they are, and they try to access like our login page or our sign up page, I want you to redirect them to our dashboard page. So it's basically a helper function that's going to help with some of that redirection. So we're going to import redirect from next navigation, and then we're going to import create client from our .supabase server folder. Make sure it's the server folder. And then we're going to export an async function redirect if authenticated. We're going to set a default path to be R. We're going to add this in a second, but it's going to be a dashboard page. And we're going to say const Supabase is equal to await create client, and then say const data is equal to await supabase.auth.get user. And then I'm going to say if data data.user. So if our user exists, meaning we have an authenticated user, let's call our redirect function and redirect them to whatever path that we pass into this function here. If we don't have a path, we'll just redirect to the dashboard page. So this is basically just encapsulating this logic here. So we don't have to do that, because for our sign up page, our sign in page, even our home landing page, if they're already logged in, we just want to redirect them to straight to the dashboard page within our product, because we already have them logged in and authenticated. And then our final util we're going to add for now is going to be the exact opposite of this. So it's just going to be a new folder within our utils file, and it's going to be redirect if not authenticated.js. And we're going to copy our redirect if authenticated, paste it in here, change this to redirect if not authenticated. The default path is going to be our login page, because if they're not authenticated, we don't want them to reach our dashboard page and other pages within our app. So we're just going to redirect them back to our login. These imports are going to stay the same. This is going to stay the same. This is staying the same. But now we're going to say if not data.user, so they're not authenticated, redirect them to the path. And then here, I did kind of create this project before just to make sure I had all the kind of steps in place of what we need to do. But I also returned the data.user. So just to keep it consistent with what I did before, because I'm going to share that project I did before with you. And then this project that we're currently working on is going to be a part of our full entire series that we're doing here. So I'm going to make sure that this is consistent with what you're seeing in my final project. Probably wouldn't need to do this though, now that I'm looking at it again, but it's still fine to just return the data.user here. But basically the same thing that we just did, but we're just redirecting if they're not authenticated, defaulting to the login path, and then checking if not data.user, redirect them to this path. So that is our utils folder. Now let's create at the root of our application, so on the same level as our package.json, create a middleware.js file. And then all we're going to do in this file is import our update session from our utils Supabase middleware, export an async function middleware with the request, return, calling our update session with the request, export const config is equal to an object with a matcher property, which will be an array. And we're just going to pass in some regex here, a string with / parentheses dot star. So basically run this on all of our files. We're not being super specific with this right now. So that kind of sets up a lot of the not so fun stuff of our application. So now let's go actually into our app folder, and we're going to start setting up our different pages here. So for our default page.js, we're going to rename this to JSX, and then I'm going to go to this page. So what we're going to do here instead is we're going to add a landing page in which we basically show some details about our application, and then we redirect the user if they are authenticated, and then give them a chance to go sign up. Now, to save us a little bit of time here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete everything here within our return statement. So we just have our return. And then what I want you to do is in our finished project here, I want you to copy from main to main tag, so all of our JSX here, and just paste it in. Because there's really not any like particular logic that's interesting here. Basically, all we're doing is rendering out some HTML, well, JSX that gets turned into HTML. We have an H1 of our Brainwave app, a description of it. We have a link to our login page. So we do want to import link from next link here. So let me import that from next link. Import link from next link. We can get rid of image. So basically, link to our / login page that we will create in a second that will allow them to log in to get started, or they can link to our sign up page. So link href is equal to / sign up to go to our create account page. So I guess we do have a little bit of logic here to add our links to our login and sign up. And then here we basically have an array of just some details about our app. We map over that and render out some different cards for that. But apart from that, this is just some JSX as well as styles, which is not the most interesting thing in the world. So go ahead and copy and paste this from the final project. If you want to make a different landing page, you of course can. But since there's not a ton of like logic here, I don't think that we need to really kind of type this out word for word and take up a bunch of time doing so. But just make sure you have these two links here for login and sign up, importing those from next link. And then we're also going to await, redirect, if authenticated, and call that function. And of course, you're going to import that from our utils redirect if authenticated. And make sure to make this an async function. And I'm going to change this to landing page. You could keep it named homepage, but since this is a landing page, I think it's a little more descriptive. And then basically, we're not going to pass any arguments here. We're just going to redirect to the dashboard page if they are already authenticated. What I should be able to do here is if I run npm run dev, it should start our project up on localhost 3000. And if we go to localhost 3000, you should see our homepage here, which is good to see. It means that maybe we didn't break anything with all that code that we just wrote. We need to implement our login, our create account page, as well as our dashboard page. So first, I think it makes the most sense to maybe create our dashboard page. So within our app, new folder, dashboard. Within dashboard, create a page.jsx. Then here we're going to import create client from our utils Supabase server. And then we're going to import our redirect if not authenticated from our utils, because on our dashboard page, this is within our application now. So if they're not authenticated, we're going to redirect them. We're going to export default async function dashboard. It's going to be a super simple dashboard right now, and I'm also going to spell function correctly. Later on in this series, we're going to, of course, make this more interesting, but right now, we're just focusing on authentication, sign in and sign out with Supabase. But at the top here, we're going to do await, redirect if not authenticated. We're not going to pass in a path, just redirect them back to the login page. But we're also going to say const Supabase is equal to await create client. So using our utils we set up, const data is equal to await supabase.auth.get user. And then we're going to just return, and you guessed it, we're going to copy and paste our return here again because it's not very interesting right now. Just a wrapper div here with some styles, and then a div within that div saying welcome. And then we're injecting our data.user.email. So this is going to make sure to tell us if we're actually logged in or not. So welcome data.user.email. This page is protected by server-side auth. And then we also are going to create a log out button. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So this will be our dashboard. We just need to create this log out button. So for this, within app, I'm going to create a new folder, but I'm going to say underscore components. And the underscore is going to make sure that it's clear that this is a private folder. Meaning if I added a page.js to this folder, it would not make a /_ components path. It would stay private. So this is explicitly saying like, hey, this is a private folder within our app directory. So underscore components, new file, logout button.jsx. And then for our logout button here, what we're going to do is we're going to render a button to log them out, but we're actually going to use a server action for this, which also means I want to go ahead and create a couple of server actions to help with logging out and signing up. So within our app folder, we're actually going to create a auth folder, although this could very well just be a regular folder. I'm just making sure to keep this consistent with how I initially created this project here. So when you're looking at it, it looks good, but I don't see why I didn't just create this as a normal folder. So I think that you should be totally fine to do that, but just to make sure I don't break anything from what you're seeing in the final project to what I created initially. We're creating it like this. So parenthesis auth parenthesis. Within that, create a actions.js file. And then within here, we're going to create 3 separate functions: log in, sign up, and log out. And we're going to use that log out within our logout button, but we'll get to that in just a second. So we're going to make this use server because these are going to be server actions. So they're just going to run server side. We're going to import create action client from @utils Supabase actions. We're going to import redirect from next navigation here. And then we're first going to create our login button. So export async function login accept form data const Supabase is equal to await create action client because we're in our server action. So we want to create our action client from our utils. Const email is going to be equal to a stringified form data dot get email. And we're going to just add a little fallback here to an empty string. We're going to do the same thing for a password. So copy this, paste it below, do password, and then use password here. I'm going to say const air is equal to await supabase.auth.sign in with password, email, password. So try to sign them in. But then I'm going to say if there's an error, we're going to redirect them to our login and add an error as a query parameter here. Now you wouldn't need to do this, but for the sake of giving us some debugging here, especially when I was creating this initially, I wanted to be able to see the error as a query param. So this is how I decided to do it. You could, of course, do something differently here. We're going to encode URI component, call that, and then put our error dot message. So we're basically saying if there's an error, redirect them to the login page, but add a login query parameter as error, and that's just going to allow us to see it. But if there's not an error, so we don't hit this redirect line here, we're just going to redirect to our dashboard page. So if they log in successfully, go to our dashboard page. Now we're going to do a very similar thing. So copy this, paste it below, but this is going to be for our sign up. It's going to accept form data, Supabase, await, create action client is correct. Email and password are both correct. Const error is going to be supabase.auth.sign up. So instead of sign in with password, it's going to be just sign up with email password. If error, we're going to redirect them to a sign up page, which we'll create in a second with our error.message. Else, redirect them to the dashboard. And then finally, export async function log out. Const Supabase is equal to await create action client, await supabase.auth.sign out. And then we will redirect them back to our login page. So pretty straightforward here. For our login, we're going to accept the form data, which in our login page will create a form for them to log in. Same with our sign-in page. Both of these, we accept form data, get email password, and then we just call this Supabase helper function, sign in with password, or we call sign up. If there's an error, redirect them back to either the login or sign up with our error as a query parameter. Else, redirect them to the dashboard. Then log out, just call supabase.auth.sign out. And then redirect them to the login page. So now with this in place, let's go back to our logout button in which we are going to export a default function called logout button. We're going to return a form element. We're not going to set an action on it, but within this form, we're going to render out a button that is going to say log out. But on the form action property, we're going to set our log out server action. So our logout button is literally just a form with a button, where on the button, the form action property is set to our logout server action, which is the logout server action that we just created here that will log the user out. And then now all the way back to our dashboard, we need to make sure to import our logout button here from our components folder. So that should set up our dashboard page. Now we won't be able to get to our dashboard page until we have a logged in user. We can make sure to test that. So if I try to go to /dashboard, we get redirected to our login page, which is what we'd expect, but we haven't created our login page. So we should go create our login page. So let's go back to VS Code. Within our app directory, we're going to create a new folder called login. We're going to create a page.jsx within this folder. And we're super close here. Now we just need to create login and sign up. And we should be pretty much good to go here with having authentication implemented with Supabase. So hang in there. You're doing good. We're almost there. Now for this page, it is again going to be a lot of JSX and not a lot of like actual logic that we're using for Supabase and Next.js auth. So what I want you to do is export default function login page. We're going to await redirect if authenticated. So if they try to go to our login page and they are already logged in user, redirect them to the dashboard page. But now we are going to return and we're going to do what we did before here. Well, first, spell function correctly. We're going to return and I'm going to copy and paste from our final project that again is linked below, and then make sure to make this a async function here so you don't get an issue. But we're going to have a couple of things of note here. So first, in H1, welcome back, sign in to continue to brainwave. But now we're going to have this form here that is like our main logic. Below our form, we have by continuing, you agree to our terms. So just like almost a little footer in our sign up page. But the main logic here is within our form, in which we set an action property of our form to be login. So we need to import our login server action that we just created from our auth actions folder. So that is now imported. So that is the action we set on our form. So we're going to trigger a server action here. We have an input for the email. So you can see the ID is email, the name is email, the type is email. So that means for the server action of login here, they will be able to get our form data.get email. So make sure that your form is set up with an input of email. And then we do the very same thing for an input of password. You can see name, ID, type, all password here. And then we also have a submit button, which we also need to create here because we're going to do something pretty dang cool. Our submit button is actually going to be a client component, and we're going to slot that client component into our server component here. So what we're going to do here within components, new file, submit button.jsx. This is going to be a client component because we're going to add some interactivity here and it's going to be pretty sweet. You just wait and see. So import use form status from React DOM. Export default function submit button. Destructure from the props. Children pending text, which we're just going to set to working ... And then we'll also pass in some class names as well. And then here we're going to say const pending is equal to use form status, calling that hook from React DOM. And this needs to be a client component because you can only call React hooks from client components. But then we are going to return, you guessed it, let's copy and paste our JSX that we're going to return here. But I'll walk you through the logic. So paste that in here from our final project. We just have a button. Make sure it is of type submit. And then also make sure that you import use form status, not use form state. Just about messed that up. But use form status, not use form state. But we have a button. Make sure it's of type submit. We're going to set disabled to pending. Aria busy to pending. So if pending is true from use form status, it's basically going to tell us, is our form still submitting? Then set it to pending. Or is our server action, it hasn't resolved yet, set this form to pending. So disable while pending, are you busy while pending? When it's pending, we're going to change some class names here within our class names of our button. And then also while it's pending, add this circular loader. And then if it's pending, show pending text, else show our children. So basically it's going to be a cool little client-side button that is going to manage some form state when the form is like still in loading state. So then within login, make sure to import that button from our components. And you can see that's imported above now, but make sure that for this like use form status that it's rendered within a form element like what we do here. And then you'll see how this works. It's totally fine to import a client component and slot that into a server component, and we can still use server actions here. It's really cool how you can get these to work together. And this is mostly still server side for all this stuff. We're just kind of slotting in this client component. So we're keeping our client bundle nice and trim here, but adding some cool kind of UX. And then below, we basically don't have an account. Okay, go ahead and go to the sign up page here and create an account. So that should be our login page. If we come back here, we see link is not defined. So let's make sure to import our link component here as well from next link. And now if we come back, we have a pretty clean looking login page. Now, what we have to do is create our sign up page here. So let's close out of these. We're almost there, guys. Within app, create a new folder called sign up, create a page.jsx file within sign up. And then here we're going to export default function sign up page, await redirect if authenticated. So if they're already logged in, then go ahead and take them to the dashboard page. Else we're going to return. You guessed it, we're going to copy and paste this from our final project as well, like so. But don't worry, let's run you through the logic here. So first off, make sure this is an async function. I do not know why I keep forgetting that. Probably going to do that a bunch throughout this series. But we have create your account, start using Brainwave in seconds. For our form here, where our main logic is, by continuing, we agree to our terms below it. So for our main logic in our form, we're going to pass an action, which is going to be our sign up server action here from our actions that we just created within our auth folder. We're going to have a label and input for our email, a label and input for our password. We're going to, again, use our submit button here like so. But it's just going to be for create account is going to be our children, but it's going to be our same submit button that we reuse. We're going to make sure to import link this time from next link, like so, because if they already have an account, just take them to the sign in page. With our sign up in place, I think we have everything ready to go. So let's go back to our sign up. We see our create your account, start using Brainwave, sign in. And hey, let's go ahead. Let's try to sign in here with an email and password. So I'm going to use my ryan@coderyan.io email, type in a password, and the moment of truth here. Now pay attention to the UI here. You should see a nice little loading indicator once I click create account, which we do. And hey, we were immediately navigated to our dashboard page. Welcome ryan@coderyan.io, protected by server auth, and we have a logout button. Now, before we look at that, let's look at our Supabase project. Within authentication and users, let's refresh. And we do see we have a new user here created, which is pretty dang cool. So you have successfully added the ability to sign a user up. Let's now test logout. So let's click the logout button. Takes us back to the login page. Let's try to access our dashboard page and see if that works. It does not. We are redirected back to login, so our protected route is working. You can also implement protected routes in middleware. In this case, I thought it was a little easier to do within the pages themselves with our utility functions, but you could, of course, do that in middleware as well. But now let's try to go ahead and log in with the email and password that we just created. signing in. You see the nice little UX for that, and then we are logged in. And now if we try to access just like the home page, you see we're navigated back to dashboard because we're already logged in. Why do you need to go to our landing page? Let's try to access login. Does not work. We go back to dashboard. Let's try to access sign up. Does not work. We're redirected back to dashboard. So our redirects look like they're working. Login, sign up looks like it's working. Just to make sure here, once again, let's do create account. I'm going to add another user here. We're going to use a different email address, coderyansolomon@gmail.com. And then let's do create account. Let's see this good looking UX here again. Looks great. We're logged in with our new account. I'm going to click log out. Let's head back to Supabase, refresh. We should see 2 users now, and we do. And now that we're logged out, we should be able to go to our landing page, which we do. Create account takes us to create account. Get started takes us to log in. And it looks like we have everything working correctly here. So that is how you can add authentication to your Next.js app using Supabase. Hopefully you learned some really cool things here with like creating this submit button and using that sign up form. We used server actions here. We use middleware and redirects. If you have any questions about how we set some of this stuff up, definitely let me know. I do have dedicated videos on like middleware in Next.js here. This was fairly straightforward. Let me know if you have any questions. Now we are going to go build out the rest of this AI assisted notes app. We're going to create a table using SQL, and that table is going to exist within Supabase. And then we are going to read and write to that table and do some revalidation, some other cool stuff like that. So we want to initialize a brand new database that's going to be our notes database. Now, in the description below, you also have a final project. In that final project, there should be a file called initnotesdb.sql. You're going to click on that, and in this file, you should see the SQL that we are going to want to copy. So I'm going to do Command A, Command C to copy this SQL, and then we're going to head over to Supabase. From our Supabase project here, we're going to click on SQL Editor, and then I'm going to just hit Command V. And basically, let me run you through this SQL before we actually execute this here. What we're going to do is we're going to create a notes table here. It's going to have a handful of different columns. We're going to have a user ID, a title, content, created at, updated at, and then we're adding some row level security. And what we're basically doing here is we're making sure in order to read and write to this table, the auth.userid, so the current authenticated user, it must match the user ID from our create or read or request. So in code, we're going to send a user ID, and then that's going to have to match like our auth.uid, our authenticated user's ID. So we're just adding some security here. I'm not a database security specialist. I am a front end guy that kind of just figures things out on the back end. So I'm not saying this is the best way to do this, but this is adding another layer of security here. But again, database security is not my expertise. And then we also add this create policy here. We add a trigger to keep the updated at fresh, but ultimately this will create our table with the different row level security that we would like to have. So make sure nothing is highlighted here. So it runs the entire query. But then I'm going to click run. Yes, it has a destructive operation, but in this case, we're okay with that. So we're going to click run this query. And then you should see success, no rows returned. And then we should be able to go to our table editor here. And then we should see one table. And we do see a notes table. If we click on that, we should see a notes table with our different columns. We can also go to our database column, and then we can see a schema visualizer of our single table here. But I'm going to go back to my table editor because we're going to look at this in a sec. So pretty cool. We generated a table, and now we can start writing code to then use that table. So back into VS Code here, I'm going to X out of this .sql file. But then what we're going to do is within our app directory, we're going to add a new folder. We're going to keep this consistent. So we're going to add our parentheses here, but we're going to go parenthesis, notes, parenthesis, and this is where we're going to add some more actions. So within our notes folder, we're going to add a new file, actions.js. And then here we're going to just write a bit of code, which is going to basically be a server action that is going to create a new note in our database. So it's going to be use server here at the top. And then we're going to export an async function called create note. It's going to accept form data. And then we're going to say const supabase is equal to await create action client, importing that from util Supabase action. So if you already did the previous part of this video, you know what this is. But for those of you that maybe just are watching this section in isolation here, in our utils Supabase actions folder, which you can see down here, we just create a bunch of helper utils for Supabase that are basically going to allow us to create a connection to Supabase, whether that's within a server action, whether that is within a server component, whether it's within a client component. It's going to create that connection to Supabase. But then below this, we're going to say const, and we're going to do some destructuring. So data, colon, two curly braces again, user is equal to await supabase.auth.get user. So this is effectively getting our currently authenticated user from Supabase. We're going to say if not user. So if a user doesn't exist, let's just do a quick redirect here to the login page. And also we imported redirect from Next navigation. Else, if the user does exist, we're going to say const title is equal to a string. So casting it to a string, form data dot get title. And then we're going to set a default value of an empty string. And then we're also going to dot trim this as well. And then we're going to do the same thing for content. So I'm going to hold Option Shift down arrow. I am on a Mac. I'm not sure what the exact keyboard shortcuts are going to be on a non-Mac, but that was Option Shift down arrow. And then I'm going to do content and then set this to content. So we're getting our title and content from our form data, which we will create our form here in a second. We're not really focused too much on error handling right now, but I'll say if not title, if there's not a title, we'll just throw an error, I guess, of must have title. If anything, it'll just kind of shout out to us a little bit. And then we'll say const error is equal to await supabase dot from our notes table. So access Supabase, and then we want to access our notes table. So Supabase dot from notes, and then we want to insert into that table. You can, of course, either ask ChatGPT or look at the Supabase docs on these different methods that they have, but we're going to use the insert method. There's a bunch of different helpers that you can use. We're going to pass an array that has an object in which our user ID is going to be, you guessed it, our user.id, pass our title and our content. So we're using JavaScript shorthand properties. So assign title to title, assign the content property to the content value. And then we'll say if there is an error, we'll do a similar thing. We'll just throw the error. And then there's one other thing here that's super important. I'm going to put this in right now, but we're also going to show why we need this in a second, and it'll be better than any explanation that I can give. So we need to call revalidate path and put in the path that we want to revalidate. In our case, they're going to be adding and getting their notes on the dashboard page. So we want to make sure that we set this to /dashboard because we're going to revalidate the dashboard cache. I'll show you how this works when we leave this out in a second, and it'll be very evident for why we need this. So now with our server action in place, there's really not much else we need to do here to start creating and getting our notes. So let's head over to the dashboard page and we'll actually set up our form here and get everything working. So what I'm going to do here, as I did previously in this tutorial, is we're going to write out the logic here at the top. We're going to copy and paste the HTML or JSX that gets converted into HTML, and then I'll kind of talk through everything. So up at the top here, we're still going to do our redirect if not authenticated. But in this function, you're going to see we return our data.user because we actually want to use our user here. So I'm going to say const user is equal to await redirect if not authenticated. So this function, it returns the user, but it also checks if there's a user, and if there's not, it redirects the user back to the login page. So this will give us our user. And then below this, we still want our create client from Supabase server because this is a server component. But then after we have that, we're no longer going to do this and just render out like our pretty lame dashboard page. We're going to get all of our notes from our notes table corresponding to this user. So what I want to do is say const data, and then we're going to rename this to notes. And then I'm going to say air is equal to await supabase dot from. So similar syntax as creating dot from notes. And then we want to select, well, what do we want to return? Well, I guess we will return an ID, a title, content, created at, and updated at. And be aware of the syntax here. So this is just one string here separated by comma, space, column name, comma, space, column name. So it's just this one string. It's not an array of a bunch of different strings. It's just one string. And then we're going to say dot order by created at. And then send an option for that saying ascending as false. So order them by created at. And then from our final project, since we kind of went over the main logic here, I'll talk through some stuff down below. I want you to go ahead and remove everything in the return here. Copy main tag to main tag in the final project, and then paste that in here. Now we're going to kind of step through this. It's just a lot of class names and JSX that's not super interesting, which is why I decided to copy and paste there. But one thing that we need is we want to render out our logout button. So I'm going to make sure that that is imported. We did indeed import that from components already, so that's good. We still kept our sign in as username, but then below we create a card that this is going to have our form for creating our note. So we have this form element here, and then the action of this form is going to be our create note action right here. So make sure to import that from our parenthesis notes, parenthesis actions file. So you can see we imported it right here. So our action is create note. We have a title, input, and label. We have a content text area here, and we make sure to give it the name and ID of content, and here name and ID of title. So when we call create note, we can get our title and content from our form data. And then we have a submit button that we created. So again, if you've been following along, and I just imported that as well here. So import submit button from components. But if we look at this, it's kind of actually pretty cool. What we do here is we use this use form status hook from React to get some pending state. And then we add a little bit of an animation to this submit button, and it is of type submit. So when they click on this button, you'll see a cool little animation. And then also it will trigger our action for our form here because our button is of type submit. And then here, I have no idea why I put this logic here. I think we can actually just remove this altogether. So in the final project, I'm going to keep it in there. So when you copy and paste, you see what I'm seeing here. But go ahead. I see no reason why I actually put this in here. I might have just been testing and forgot to remove it. But go ahead and remove that altogether and just render out your submit button and remove that ternary operator. So it should look like this. All right. So go ahead and remove that altogether. And then here, if there's an error, we just say failed to load notes. And then here, if there's not any notes, we should see a div or like a little card that says you don't have any notes, go ahead and create them. And then here we have a UL that maps over our notes. So notes.map, and it renders out a little card component for each one of our notes. You could, of course, abstract this into its own card component and clean this up quite a bit here. But for the sake of this, we're really just focusing on reading and writing to Supabase. Now, there's one other thing I want to do here before seeing if we messed anything up is for this dashboard page, I want to add a new file and I want to add a loading.jsx. And here we're going to keep it nice and easy. Go ahead and just copy and paste this from my final project as well. But we're just going to export default function loading. and it says loading your notes. The reason I wanted to include this because we will see this in our UI. It will, for a split second, say loading notes. It's just to say that this is a really good way that you could decide to extend this and customize this loading page. Maybe you render like a loading skeleton. I'm sure you could probably paste this into ChatGPT and be like, hey, create a loading skeleton for this page. ChatGPT would probably create that in like 2 seconds, and then you'd have a really cool loading page. But I'm leaving that as an exercise to you if you'd like to do that. But that should give us our dashboard page. If I didn't mess anything up here, forget any imports, which I would kind of be surprised if I didn't forget anything. And then we have our loading page, and we created our notes action. And then with that, our project is running right now on localhost 3000. If yours is not, make sure to run npm run dev. We can see mine is running right here. And let's go check it out. Let's see what's going on here. So back in our project here, we see I am signed in as Ryan at coderyan.io. We see a logout button. I'm not totally impressed with this like UI right here. You could definitely improve this, but we do see a pretty decently looking create note card, as well as you don't have any notes yet because we haven't created any notes. So let's go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to say test note, and then I don't know, let's just bang on the keyboard a bit, and then let's click save note. So we see saving the note status here, which is good. And then we do see the note appear here. So according to my calculations, I think we managed to do this without breaking anything. So back at our notes table, I didn't hit anything there. It must automatically refresh it. You could also click refresh there. But we do see I have successfully added a new note to our database, which is really cool. So if that just worked for you as well, congratulations. You were just able to add a new table to the database, writing SQL, and then you were able to read from the database because we wrote in our dashboard page here. We read from our database right here, getting from our notes table. And then we also wrote to our database with our server action here, writing our title and our content. So let's come back. Let's add another test 2. I spelled 2 wrong, but I'm not going to worry about it. And then I'll click save note. We see another note is written. So that's looking good. Now let's try to log out, log in with a new user and make sure that we don't see any notes. So let's log out, log in with a new user, signing in. And we see I'm logged in as a different user now, and I don't see any notes, which is great because that's telling me that we are getting notes by user ID and everything's looking good there. I'm going to just say title, content, very original, save note. We see this note. We don't see any of our other notes. If I refresh, we don't see any of those notes. If I log out, log back in with my first user, we see just their 2 notes and we don't see any other notes. So it looks like this is working. If I go back to the database and I refresh, we see 3 different notes, 2 of them with the same user ID, 1 with a different one, which is what we would expect. But one thing I do want to show you before we wrap things up here is what if we forget in our actions here? What if I don't revalidate my path here? So comment this out, come back. I'm going to do a hard refresh here to just make sure everything's good. Oh, and then you see loading your notes here up at the top left. Like I said, you could definitely make that into a more kind of custom skeleton component by manipulating this loading.jsx within your dashboard page. I think that would be a cool thing to do. But without this revalidate path here, if I add another note, so another note with some text and we click save note, you see, I don't see my note pop up right away. And that's because we're just showing our stale data here. What we need to do is after we create this note, we need to manually say, hey, I need you to revalidate this path. So when you create a note, it revalidates the cache and we see the new note show up on the page. So now if I refresh, we see it. Since I commented back in revalidate note, I should see revalidated notes, save note. We do see it pop up. So it's important to make sure you're doing your revalidation as needed as well. But that's how you can connect Next.js to Supabase, create a table, and do some reading and writing to that table. In our next video, we're going to cover some other things that you can do, like updating, delete, and then continue this brainwave project. Let's head over to VS Code here and to start adding CRUD to our application, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to extend our notes actions here. So within our app directory, within our notes folder here, in parentheses, notes folder, because we're going to actually add another notes folder here later that's not in parentheses. Not the best folder structure, I must admit, but this is what we're rocking with. There's going to be a final project linked in the description below as well if you want to see the final project. But let's go to this actions folder. And we already, in our previous video, we added the ability to create a new note with this create note action. But here in today's video, I want to add update as well as delete, because we're going to finish off adding the full CRUD functionality. So what we're going to do is add export async function update note. It's going to accept our form data just like our other functions. We're going to say const Supabase is equal to await create action client, which we already import at the top of this file right here from our util Supabase action, which we added quite a while back. And then once we have that, we're going to do const open a pair of curly braces data. And then we're going to do some more destructuring. We're going to destructure the user from our data property. And then we're going to set that to equal await supabase.auth.get user. So get the currently authenticated user here. And then we'll just do a quick check here. If there's not a user, then we'll just redirect to the login page. But assuming that there is a user here, we're going to say const ID is equal to casting it to a string, get our form data dot get our ID, and then we'll have a little fallback of an empty string here. And then I'm on a Mac here as well. I'm going to do option shift down arrow to copy this down 2 more times, because we're going to get an ID. We're going to get a title from our form data. And then we're also going to get content from our form data. So ID, title, and content. We'll do a quick check. If there's not an ID or there's not a title, let's redirect. And we'll add this route in a second, but I'm going to use backticks. It's going to be notes /$ curly brace ID. Redirect them back to our notes details page, which we are going to create here in a second. And from here, we're going to say const error is equal to await Supabase dot from. So from our notes table that we already have set up, we're going to dot update our title and our content that equals ID is going to be ID, and then dot EQ again, user ID and user dot ID. So basically what we're saying here is that from our notes table, I want you to update the title and content rows from the row that has the ID of the notes ID from our form data, and then for the user from our user ID. So for the currently authenticated user, from the specific note ID that they're trying to update the title and content from the notes table is effectively what we're saying here. We could definitely do something with the error. We could throw an error. We could check if there's an error, redirect, check for different types of errors and stuff. But for now, we're not going to worry too much about it. We might revisit this here later in our project, but right now, let's just call revalidate path, dashboard, option shift down arrow, and then we're also going to revalidate our notes ID page. And as this is for the same reasons that we did earlier when we went over revalidate path, we're just going to make sure that we are clearing that cache out so we're not showing stale data, and making sure that we are showing the updated data to the user. So this should be our update note, and that should be everything working correctly here. But let's also do an export async function delete note accepting form data. And then we're going to do a pretty similar thing that we did up here. So I'm going to copy the first 3 lines here of our update note function. So connecting to Supabase here, getting our user, if not user redirect. And then actually we will grab this const ID is equal to string form data.getID, because we will delete a note by ID if there is not an ID, we will just go ahead and redirect to the dashboard page, but then we will await Supabase.from our notes table. We're going to call the .delete method, and we are going to delete the note that is equal to, so .eq. The ID is our notes ID, and then also make sure it's only from our user ID that matches our user.id. So what this is saying is that from our notes table, I want you to delete the row where the ID matches our form data ID. This is going to be the specific note that we want to delete, the ID of the note, but then only delete it if the user ID matches the currently authenticated user. And then here we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to revalidate the dashboard, but then I'm going to do Option Shift down arrow, and then we're also going to redirect them back to the dashboard, because where we're going to use this is on a notes detail page. And if they're on the notes detail page, but then we delete the note for that detail page, well, there's not really any details to show about that note because it's already deleted. So we'll redirect them to the dashboard. This will probably make more sense once we see this in action, but those are our server actions for updating a note as well as deleting a note. We can actually, let's just completely get rid of this const error. We might use it later, but if we do, we will address it at that point, just to make these look a little bit cleaner. So that is updating a note and deleting a note from our table. But now let's go add that notes detail page. So within our app directory, add a new folder called notes, then add a new folder within that folder, square bracket ID square bracket. So this is going to be a dynamic route. And then within this dynamic route, let's add a page.jasx. So within the square bracket ID square bracket, add a new page.jasx file. And then as we've done previously, since this is a lot of Tailwind CSS class names and JSX that gets converted into HTML, we're going to copy and paste from the final project. So go ahead and go to the final project link below, copy this notes ID page.jsx, and then we're going to paste it in here, but then I'm going to talk you through all the important logic. So we pasted in our notes detail page here. And what we do at the top of the page is we first check, okay, is the user authenticated? If they're not, I want you to redirect them to the login page. This is this line of code right here that we've seen previously in this application. This function returns the current user, and then we can connect to Supabase. So const Supabase is equal to await create client. We're importing create client from our Supabase utils, and this is a server page. We do import a couple of client components, but this is a server page. And then we say const ID is equal to await params, which is important because params is now async in Next.js. So you need to make sure to await your params, and then we get the current ID. We get the ID from our params because in our notes folder, our square bracket ID square bracket basically means that we are expecting to navigate to this page with a path that looks like notes / and then some ID matching our notes ID. So it might be, some number that we're going to navigate to. And then based on this notes ID that's added in our params of our URL here, and we're going to walk through all this in our actual running application, but we're going to navigate to say notes /3. Then on our params object, that's going to have a property that matches our folder name. So it's going to be an ID property that is going to match the number 3. And then based on that note ID, we're then going to get that note from our database. So we're going to say const data, and then we're renaming that to note, is equal to await Supabase from our notes table. We're going to select our ID, title, content, updated at, created at, and user ID. But we're going to get the note that matches our params ID. So the ID that is equal to the ID from our params here. And then we're only going to get that single note. So in this dynamic route here in Next.js, we're going to get the ID of the note from our params of our URL. And then based on that ID, we're going to get that single note from Supabase. If there's not a note, we're going to return calling not found from next navigation. If for some reason the note user ID does not equal the user ID, we're going to redirect to dashboard. However, our row level security that we already added should already block this. So it's just kind of like a just in case. And then we add a bunch of just kind of styles and JSX here. We include our last updated, which is our note.updated at. And then here we get into some logic for our delete button. So in our components here, you're going to see we haven't added this confirm button at this point, but we're going to add that in a second. What this is basically going to do is this is a form and our action is set to our delete note server action that we already added. So here, this is our delete note server action that we just added right here. So what we're doing within this page is we're basically saying when the button of type submit, this confirm button, is clicked, we're going to trigger this delete note server action. Now we are going to create a confirm button here in just a second. Let's actually just create that right now. Within our components folder, create a new file called confirm button.jsx. And then you guessed it, let's copy and paste from the final project, and then I'll walk us through it. So basically it is a client component. So put use client up at the top. It needs to be a client component because we're using a React hook, and then also we're handling an on click. So anytime you do that, it has to be a client component because we're handling user action and we're using React features like use form status. We pass it a few props. We use the use form status hook like we have earlier to check if the form is still pending or not. So we can add some cool little animation here as well. But then we set this button to type submit. Now on click, we're going to call window.confirm with our confirm text, which is basically going to send a alert. You could do this much differently as well. You could create like your own custom confirm modal and stuff like that. But for the sake of this was probably easiest. And then when they do confirm it, it will proceed and we'll submit our form. Now coming back to our page, we just need to make sure to import our confirm button from app_components confirm button, which if you copy and pasted, it's probably already imported like that, but just make sure that that is correctly imported and you have created that confirm button. And it's totally fine to import a client component into a server component like this. That is not going to cause any issues. Next.js is still going to render this server side, but it's going to keep this little slot open to render our client component. And then similarly, we have an edit form down below that has our input for our title, input for our content. It includes a link to where if they want to cancel the edit, then they can click cancel and then we return them to our dashboard page. But then we also use our submit button that is of type submit. And when they click this, and we already created our submit button earlier, but when they click this, it is going to trigger the server action of update note, which we import right here from our actions folder to where we will then update our note when they click on this submit button right here. And then that's really it for that page. Now I do want to add, just like what we did earlier, within our ID folder, let's add a new page that's loading.jsx. And then we're going to just export default function, a really simple loading note page that's going to return a div with loading note. And then I'm just going to copy the class name from our final project. You can just copy and paste this component as well. Basically, when they go to our notes ID page, we're going to show just a little bit of UX here saying, hey, we're loading the note. Now, like I said earlier, in some of our other loading pages that we added, like for our dashboard, this is basically just a placeholder for you could definitely extend this and like render out a loading skeleton for a note. Like you could ask ChatGPT like, hey, could you create a skeleton loader that kind of looks like this notes page, but then just show a loading skeleton to the user so they kind of get an idea of what the UI is going to look like before they even see their rendered note? I think that would be pretty cool, but that's kind of out of the scope of what I want to do here. So for now, just have a nice, simple loading page. And with all this in place, that should give us our notes detail page. It should give us the loading state. It should give us a delete button as well as an update form. And then the only other thing that we want to do here is within our dashboard page. If you scroll down, you're going to see this notes list right here. I want you to replace that with what we have in our final project, because basically what I want to do here is when we render out our list of notes in our dashboard page, I want to add an ability to delete a note within our dashboard page. And then also I want to add the ability to navigate to our notes details. So from the final project, I want you to copy and paste our new logic, starting up here at our notes list comment down to this parenthesis curly brace. So I'm going to paste that in as well. Now that we've pasted that in here, it should look pretty similar. We're still mapping over our notes here, but one major difference is that now we're adding a link tag here, importing that from next link, in which our href is set to /notes/ our note.id. So in our dashboard page, when they click on a note, it's going to link them to our notes details page at /notes/ the note ID. So we're adding that to our query parameters here. So then when they go to that page, that note ID is accessible on our params.id that we already kind of set up there. And then also we add a delete button to each note. So within the dashboard page, they'll be able to delete a note here. Just make sure that you've already imported this delete note from our actions like so. So then while they're viewing a list of their notes, they can decide to delete one, and then we render out their content as well as the updated at as well. So with all this in place, I should be able to, and I'm already running my project via npm run dev, but I think we should have everything in place now to where if we come back here, I'm going to do a hard refresh just to make sure, because we wrote a lot of code here. We're going to see if I broke anything. I wouldn't be surprised if we did. But let's go to the login page. I'm going to log in with a user that I've already added. If you don't have a user, make sure to create a user via create account and create a user, and then make sure you're logged in with him. But I'm going to sign in with a current user that I already have. And here I see that I have not imported my confirm button for my dashboard page. So I need to make sure for dashboard, import the confirm button from our components here. And then now if I come back, we see our dashboard page here. I have already created a few different notes. You can definitely create some more notes here. So I'm going to do test 4 and then a bunch of gibberish, save note, and you should see that note populate as well. We already added that functionality, but the new functionality is we should be able to click delete here and delete a note. So I'm going to try to delete this note here. It says, do you want to delete this note? I'm going to click OK. This is kind of the window.confirm that we added here. And then we see that note is deleted. Let's test and make sure. Delete, OK, deleting, and then it removes that note because we revalidate this dashboard after deleting a note, which is pretty neat. But now if I click on the title of the note, it should link me to /notes/ the ID of the note, which is good. And then we see we render out this note here. So what just happened there, and let's just do this again. Let's do back to dashboard. I'm going to click test note. You're going to see loading note here, and just for a split second, you see a loading note there. And that's where you could customize that into a loading skeleton. But that's basically showing our UI here from our notes /ID loading.jsx page here. But then when we click on a note, it navigates us to /notes/ that note ID. And it does that because in our dashboard page, around our title, I wrap a link component where the href is equal to /notes/ whatever the ID of that note is. So it navigates us to /notes/ that ID, which is why you see this URL /notes/ ID. And then here we have a notes folder within our app directory with a dynamic ID route. So square bracket ID square bracket within this page.jsx. We get the ID from the params. So we're getting this ID right here from the params. And then we're using that ID to get a single note from our database that matches that ID. And then we render out this edit note as well as delete note UI to where here, let's test this out. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to say test note, and I'm going to just put dash update. And then let's also update the content here. I'm going to say updated content so we can see this. I'm going to click save changes. It says saving. I assume that we've saved our changes now because it looks like, let me refresh this page and see if anything's changed. I refresh. Okay. It looks like our updates have remained. Let's go back to dashboard. And okay, it looks like we have successfully updated our note here because we're seeing it as we should, updated with the updates we made. Now, what if I click cancel here? It just takes me back to our dashboard. I think that's reasonable UX. And then what if I delete from our update notes page? And this is where I was talking about earlier, to where I said in our actions, when we delete, I want to redirect to our dashboard page. Because if I delete this note and then they just stay on this page, well, they're not going to see anything because we no longer have a note associated with this ID because we deleted it. So if I click delete here, it gives me a confirmation. I think that's reasonable as well. If I click OK, it says deleting, navigates us back to dashboard, and we no longer see that note existing. So let's run through this one more time. I'm going to say brief note, optional content, save note, new note is saved. Let's go to this other note here, click on it, test 3. I'm going to change this to test 4. I'm going to fix my typo here in testing and just put testing, save changes. Let's go back to dashboard. We see the updated note. Let's click into it again. And then let's delete this note. So we should only see one note here, and we do. So it looks like we've successfully added CRUD functionality to our Brainwave application. So pretty cool, if you ask me. Now, that's going to do it for this video because we've fully added the CRUD operations like we wanted to. But stay tuned for the other videos of this series because we're now going to add some cool additional AI features to this application. We're going to continue building out our full stack Next.js Supabase application here, our Brainwave Notes application, by adding a cool little AI summaries feature to our notes. So our goal here today, after getting logged in here, is when we view our notes, so I click on one of these kind of random gibberish notes here, we will then see a summarize button, and we'll add some more content to this as well. But we'll add a summarize button in which we will make a request to OpenAI's API, and then we will receive a summary of our note. So the benefit of this, if this was an actual application, is someone might have some really long notes, maybe from meetings and stuff like that. And then OpenAI could summarize that and give a nice little summary blurb of that note. So that's what we're going to do here today. The first thing that we're going to have to do here is actually update our Supabase database. So I'm going to head over to Supabase, and I'm at the dashboard of our project. And what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to head over to the SQL editor. I'm going to remove everything that we already added here because we added this when we wanted to actually add our table. But what I want to do now is I want to update the notes table because we're going to add a couple of columns on it for the summary text that OpenAI returns for us. So we can save that in our database, and then we can have a summary text associated with each note. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run alter table notes, add column if not exists, summary text. And then we're also going to alter table notes, add column if not exists, summarized at, and it's going to be a timestamp. So we're adding a column called summary, and it is going to be a text field. And then we're adding a column summarized at, and it's going to be a timestamp. And then we are going to, of course, write to these columns in our application once we summarize from OpenAI and we return their API request. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure nothing's highlighted here, and I'm going to run this. Success, no rows returned. If we go to our database here, we should see these two additional columns here, summary as well as summarized at. So now that we have our table all set up, let's go ahead and get OpenAI set up. It's going to be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is get an API key from OpenAI. So I want you to come to platform.openai.com/docs/overview. If you don't already have an account, go ahead and create an account. I believe creating an account is free. Now, I don't know if there's like a free trial period to where you get some free credits to start, because I've done this before. So I didn't have any free credits. So I did have to add and buy some credits to my account. but I think you could buy like just $1 of credit. If you just want to kind of set this up and then kind of go through the motions and not buy anything, I also totally understand that. But come to this URL, make sure you're logged in, and then over here on the right-hand side, you're going to click on your icon here and then go to your profile. And then over here on the left-hand side, go ahead and click API keys. And you can see I've already added several here, which is one of the reasons why I don't have any credits left, but I've already added an API key for our Notes app. So I'm not going to add another one, but all you have to do here is click create new secret key, give your secret key a name, as well as you can just select default project and then click create secret key. And then once you create that key, go ahead and copy that key to your clipboard. So copy your secret key that you created, and then we're going to come back to VS Code. And here within VS Code, I want you to open your .env.local file, and you're going to add an environment variable called OpenAI underscore API underscore key. And then you're going to set that equal to the OpenAI key that you just created within OpenAI. So you're going to copy your key here from this page, and then you're going to come back to VS Code and paste that key in as your OpenAI underscore API underscore key. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this up. And then just make sure if your server was already running here, make sure to kill your server and then run npm run dev again, just to make sure that that picks up your latest environment variables. So that should set up our connection to OpenAI and should allow us to now use its API, but now we need to update our notes actions here. So in our parentheses notes parentheses folder, go to your actions file, scroll all the way to the bottom here, and we're going to add a couple of different functions here. Now we could, when they update a note, if the note is updated, then the summary might be out of date. What we could do is we could also set like the summary here to null during the update here. I'll kind of leave that up to you if you want to do that, but just know that this is something that I considered here as well. When you update a note, if it already has a summary, you might want to set that to null just because the summary is maybe no longer valid for the note. You could also, during the update, get a new summary and just populate it at that point. You could do that anyways. When they create a note, you could automatically create a summary of that note with OpenAI. There's a ton of different stuff you could do. Just know that we're not going to really mess with our create, update, and delete functions that we already created. We're going to leave those how they are, but it would make sense if you're making this like a full-fledged application. When you do an update, maybe you go get a new summary. Maybe when you create a note, go get a new summary. But the way we're going to implement it is the user is going to click on a button to generate a summary. So we're going to create the helper functions that are going to help with that. So first up here, create an async function called call LLM. Within the parameters, destructure the API key as well as the content. And then I'm going to say const prompt is equal to, and I'm going to paste in a prompt here in which I say, summarize the following note in 2 to 3 concise sentences, focus on key points and next steps, if any. And then we also just truncate the content just a little bit here to kind of limit the request that we're making to OpenAI just a little bit. You wouldn't have to do that, of course, but that'll make things just a little more efficient. In an actual application, we might not want to do that. And below, I'm going to say const res is equal to await fetch, and then we're going to fetch. You could definitely set this URL as a constant. We're going to just hard code it for now. https://api.openai.com/v1/chat/completions. And then as a second argument to this call, we're going to add an object where the method is going to be a post request. We're going to set our headers, and headers is going to be an object here where we're going to set our authorization as backticks bear $ curly brace, and then send our API key. So make sure on your headers for your authorization property, headers is going to be an object, and on your authorization property of that object, you're going to set a bear as your API key. And then we also are going to set content hyphen type as application /JSON. And then we're going to do comma body is going to be JSON dot
stringify, calling that, passing an object. The model is going to be, we're going to use GPT hyphen 40 hyphen mini. I guess it's 40, not 40. Messages is going to be an array, in which the first value of the array is going to be role as system. And then the content is going to be, you are a concise assistant. And then we're going to say role as user. Content is going to be our prompt that we just set up earlier. You can read through the OpenAI docs for sure to understand how to make these requests and stuff. But basically what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we want to use this OpenAI model, GPT-4o mini, for the messages that we send. The system's role is going to be a concise assistant. And then for the user, we're going to make sure to give this prompt. And then after that array, we're going to set a temperature of 0.2 as well as a max tokens of 180. And like I said, you can look at the docs and configure this how you'd like to as well. So that's going to be our request there. And then we'll say if not res.okay, we're just going to console.err OpenAI error, and then cancel out the response. And then we'll throw a new error, LLM request failed, just so it's nice and loud so we can see it. And I'll say const JSON equals await res.json, calling that function, return JSON dot, and it returns a choices property in which we're going to access the first item in the array, and we're going to get the messages dot content dot trim or an empty string. So of the choices array, we're going to get the first item. Of that item, it's going to be an object. We're going to access the messages property. On the messages property, it's going to be an object. We're going to access the content property, and it should be a string that we can trim or just default to an empty string. And you can look at the OpenAI docs to see the response of this completions API here. And then we're going to just add one more function below, export async function summarize note. It's going to accept form data here. I'm going to say const Supabase, await, create action client. And this is where we're going to get the summary and then write it to Supabase. Const data, and then destructure the user is equal to await supabase.auth.get user. If there's not a user, then we will redirect to the login page. Const ID is equal to casting to a string form data.get ID or default to an empty string. If not ID, we'll just return const data, renaming that to note is equal to await supabase.from our notes table. I want you to dot select the ID, and then just be careful here. It's all one string. It's quote ID, comma, user ID, comma, content, comma, summarized underscore at. So it's all one string here. ID, comma, user ID, comma, content, comma, summarized at. Dot equal, the ID is going to be equal to the ID that we pass in, and then we're going to get just one dot single. And we can add another quick check if not note, or the note dot user ID is not equal to the user dot ID. We can return, we can throw an error here too. And then we'll say const API key is equal to process.env.open AI key. If there's not an API key, we will return. You could definitely cancel that error here or something like that as well, but we're just going to return for now. Const summary is equal to await, and then we're going to call our call LLM function here above. So call LLM, we're going to pass our API key as well as our note dot content. Just to kind of reiterate what we're doing here. connect to Supabase, get our user from Supabase. If there's not a user, redirect to login. Then in our form data, we're going to expect our ID of our note that the user wants to summarize. So we're going to get that ID. If there's not an ID, return. But then based on that ID, we're going to select that note from our Supabase table. We're going to make sure that our user ID matches the note user ID as an extra check. We should have a row level security set up in Supabase that will prevent this anyways, but just an extra check here. Get our API key. If there's not one, return. But if there is one, get the summary by calling our LLM function by passing our API key as well as our content. And I just realized I made a mistake here. I don't know why I passed this as an object, but you should also just pass a single object where our API key is our API key, and then our content is our note.content. So make sure to pass it as an object. I don't know why I did this. You could definitely just pass it as parameters and remove the object syntax here, but I'll just keep it consistent with what I was already doing. And then now what we need to do is we need to write this to Supabase. So we'll just await Supabase dot from our notes table. We're going to call dot update the summary. Well, that's going to be our summary. So we'll use JavaScript shorthand notation. So summary is summary. Summarized at is going to be new date dot to ISO string, calling that. So just creating a timestamp for our summarized at, and we'll say dot equal the ID should be our note ID, but then also dot equal user ID should be our user.id, and then we will make sure to revalidate path for our dashboard page, option shift down arrow, and then also for our notes / curly brace ID. Then just make sure that this is in backticks here. So we get our summary from our summary function that we just created above, where we make our request to OpenAI here with our note content, and it should return a summary of that content. And then after we get that summary from our notes table, we're going to update the summary column with the summary from our LLM. We're going to add a summarized at, make sure that we're updating the note that is equal to our note ID from our form data, and then also make sure it's for our user ID that matches our currently authenticated user. And then once we do update that, we're going to make sure to revalidate our dashboard page as well as our notes details page. And then now in our notes ID folder, go to your page.jsx, and we're going to revamp this a little bit, in which from our final project linked below, I want you to paste in the entire return statement here from the final project. And then I will explain what we did here. So basically, we created an additional form here up at the top of this page where we call our summarize note function. Now make sure to import summarize note from our actions here. So summarize note from notes actions. But this is just a form in which we have the ID of the note that we want to summarize. Because when we click this form and we use this server action, we're going to call summarize note with our form data, since we are using a form, and then we have a submit button here as well, passing along the ID here. And then we take that ID to summarize the note and then update that note based on its summary. And then everything else remained the same here of what we had before. But then if we come down further, we added this summary card. So basically what we do is we check, okay, is there not a note summary? If there's not a note summary, render out, there's no summary yet. But if there is, then render out a little card that has our note.summary as well as our summarized at on this notes details page. And really, that is all we needed to add there to our UI, is a little summary of our note if it exists, as well as a form that has our submit button that is going to call our server action to summarize our note, which is going to call our large language model that returns the notes summary. And then we write that to our notes table on the summary column that we just added a little while ago. So if we did everything right here, and we wrote a lot of code, so we'll see how this goes. Let's come back to our project. I'm going to do a hard refresh here. So Command-Shift-R just to make sure that we're on the latest version of our project here. But then let's actually, I'm going to delete all of my notes here. So yeah, we're going to delete all these, delete them all. And then I had AI create 3 example notes for me that I'm going to create here. You could definitely do the same thing, but I'm just copying and pasting. So we have a little bit more data to summarize here. So I'm going to save this note, create another one, and then create one last note here. So now that we have 3 like better example notes, we're going to click on one of the notes to go to our notes details page. And we should see this summarize button here at the top. We see our summary card here, no summary yet. Click to summarize above. That is what we just added. Down below on our notes details page is our summary card here, but I should be able to click summarize, which this is going to trigger the server action, which is going to use the notes ID here, this particular notes ID, this ID right here, to then get the content of this note. So it's going to get this content. It's going to send that to our large language model, our OpenAI API. It's going to return a summary of this note. And then what we're going to do is within our action, once we get the summary of the note, we're then going to update Supabase with the notes summary column as well as summarize that. And then we should see that show up on the page with the summary. So let's go ahead and click this and see how this goes. As I got super surprised, we do get an error here. So let's go check and see. It's probably something silly like a typo. So let's go check. If we look at where this error was, it came from right here. So I think it's got to be something here. Let me read through this quickly here. And it looks like I made a mistake here, as you probably have all already caught, but it's temperature. So I had a slight typo there. I'm thinking that probably caused an error there. So let's go back and I'm going to refresh this page. And now let's click summarize again. And we don't see an error, which is good, but we don't actually see anything happen, which is not good. So let's come back here once again to VS Code. So looking through this a bit, I think I found the issue. So here, instead of messages, it should be message.content.trim. I'm not going to divulge how long that took me to find that one single thing that was off, but that should be message.content.trim. So now let's see if this does the trick. Let's come back. I'm going to refresh again. And now let's click summarize. And we still don't see anything, which is not fun. Let's come back here. So don't see anything wrong here. Let's go back to our page. Maybe I messed something up here. And looking at this page, I actually know exactly what I did. When we get our notes, we are not selecting the column of our summary. So there's a chance that we're creating our summary right now, but we're not actually selecting it. So let's actually also include summary as well as summarized _at. And now let's come back. And hey, we actually see our summary now. So that took a lot to get to, but I think we have things working out. So let's go and try our other notes here. So I think we just summarized this one. Let's do this one here, research. Okay, no summary. Let's click summarize. Summarizing. And boom, we do get our summary. And we have a nice little AI summary here. Now, if you aren't getting the summary, there's also a chance that in the billing section of your OpenAI page, maybe you don't have any credits to go. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure if you get any default credits when you create an account, but you might need some credits to get this working correctly as well. I know it did not work for me when I did not have any credits in there, but it looks like we are getting our AI summaries here. And then let's do our last note here as well, just to make sure. Let's summarize it. And it takes a second, and we do indeed get our AI summary. We get our generated at here. So it looks like we have successfully implemented our AI summaries to our Brainwave app here, which is pretty cool. And of course, there's different things that you could do here. You could add your summary to the dashboard page. So maybe instead of showing your content here, you show your summary, which I think would be a cool little feature. If you do that, just make sure that we did the same thing that we did before. When you select from your notes table, make sure you're also returning your summary column here, or else you're going to have the issue that I just had a few seconds ago. But overall here, we have a pretty cool functional full stack application where you can log in and log out. You can add different notes here. When you click on a note, you can then decide to either update that note, or you can add a little summary here for that note with full CRUD functionality with our Supabase database. Now, there's of course a ton of different ways that you could take this project and extend it in the future. But what we're actually going to do in our next video is we're going to deploy this project to an actual production environment. So I'm going to show you how you can deploy a full stack Next.js project with Supabase as the backend and deploy it using Vercel. Now, the very first step in this process is making sure that your code is all pushed to GitHub. I'm assuming that you know how to do this. You can see I already have this project pushed to GitHub here, but in your code editor, you might need to make sure that you're connected to Git and that you have pushed to GitHub. Now, if you're a little unsure how to do that, you can definitely talk to ChatGPT and get everything pushed to GitHub. But I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you already know how to push your project to GitHub. So make sure that your final project is pushed to GitHub, and then we're going to head over to Vercel. Now, at Vercel, if you don't already have an account, go ahead and create an account. It is 100% free. And then once you do, go to, in the top right-hand corner, you should be logged in. Go to your dashboard. You can see this is my dashboard. I already have several kind of demo projects here, but then you're going to click add new project. And what's important here is you might need to go and connect your GitHub to Vercel. If you come to this page and you don't already see your projects, you might have to connect your GitHub account to Vercel. It's very easy. It's very straightforward to do. It will give you kind of the step-by-step prompts on how to get things connected to your GitHub. So right here, you should be able to do something like add GitHub account, and then make sure that you just sign in and add the account that is the same account that you pushed your project to. And then once you do that, you should be able to find your project. So this is mine, Brainwave Final. We can see it's the same title in GitHub, Brainwave Final here. And then I'm going to select import. Now, a couple of important things as you do this is we can keep everything the same. It already recognizes that it's a Next.js project, but what we do need to do is add our environment variables in these columns here. So it needs the key as well as the value. So I'm going to come back to our VS Code project. And what I want you to do is in your .env.local file, you're going to copy everything. So Command A, Command C. And then once you copy everything in your .env.local file, so it should be our 3 environment variables here, next public Supabase URL, next public Supabase ANI key, open API key, Command A, Command C. You can see I have all these highlighted. I'm going to copy all these. And then within Vercel, I should just be able to do Command V and then paste all 3 of those into Vercel here. And that should really be all that we have to do. Then we can click deploy. And then I can keep my fingers crossed that I didn't mess anything up, and then it just kind of works. So I'm going to give this some time here to deploy. It shouldn't take too long. And then I'll kind of cut the video when it's actually done. And it looks like things have been successfully deployed. So I can see you just deployed a new project. And then we see a little preview here. And then I'm going to click continue to dashboard here. And status says ready here. So it looks like the deployment was successful. Now, what we need to do is I'm going to copy this domain here. This is the domain that Vercel gave us. So I'm going to copy this link address, and then we need to head over to Supabase. So here within my Supabase dashboard, I've gone to Authentication, and then I've clicked on URL configuration. What we need to do is we need to add a site URL, and then I'm also going to add a redirect URL. So we're going to change our site URL to, instead of localhost, it's going to be our HTTPS brainwave-final.vercel.app. It's going to be the link that we just copied for our deployed Vercel link. So you're going to change that to your site URL, click Save Changes, and then I'm also going to add a URL as a redirect URL, and it's going to be the same one, brainwave-final Vercel app, or whatever you named it here. It's going to be this domain that Vercel gave us here.
and then I'm gonna click Save URLs. So this should make sure that Supabase will correctly work with our deployed application. So with all this set up, let's go back to Vercel, and I am going to go ahead and we're gonna go visit this domain. So we see we're at our deployed application here. I'm gonna click Get Started. I'm going to try to log in with an account that I already know that exists. If you don't already have that, you can create a new account here, but I'm going to try to log in and hopefully we're able to sign in to this project. And it looks like we are successfully able to sign in. Let's see if we can add a additional note here. So I'm going to say test note. This is a test note for test purposes. I'm going to try to save this note. And we do see the note shows up here, which is great. I'm going to try to delete one of our other notes. Yes, we'll delete that note. Looks like that note gets deleted. Let's click into one of these notes. Okay, we see that we have our summary here. Let's see if we can edit it. So I'm going to say, instead of research competitor analysis, I'm just going to change this title to all capitals test, and then click Save Changes. And then if we go back to our dashboard, we should see a note that has all capitals test, which is great. And then let's see if our summary feature still works. So for test note here, let's go click on summarize and see if it gets us a little summary. The summary is probably not going to be great because we don't really have much content here, but let's go ahead and give it a try anyway. So it's summarizing. And then we see this note is intended for testing purposes. No specific actions or steps are outlined. So yeah, it looks like our AI summaries are working, and it looks like everything is working pretty well. Let's test and see if this delete button works here. Okay, delete note. It should redirect us back to dashboard with the note deleted, and it does. And then we should be able to log out, and it looks like we can also log out, and everything looks good here. So we have successfully deployed our Next.js Supabase application using Vercel, and really just the matter of a few minutes, which is pretty dang cool. So this concludes our project here. We have added authentication. We added some cool CRUD functionality. We used some AI summaries with OpenAI, and then we even went and deployed this application to where you now have a working application that you could, share around and, extend this. There's a ton of different things that you could add to this to make it really, really cool. So thank you for following along here. Thanks for watching this video. If you just wanted to see how easy it is to deploy with Vercel and Next.js Supabase app, that's cool too. But thanks for following along with this, and thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I hope that you got something out of it. So I'll see you in that next one.